Welcome to today's Manufacturing Engineering Media webinar. Our topic is FMEA in Engineering Talent Acquisition, What Can Go Wrong and What to Do About It, sponsored by Kelly Services. Hello, I'm Jim Sawyer, Senior Editor at Manufacturing Engineering Media. Before the presentation begins, I'd like to provide some background on what we will be doing today. Our sponsor, Kelly Services, specializes in providing workforce solutions to the engineering industry and has been placing contract engineers with clients since 1965. Our presenter, Joe Lampinen, is Director and Engineering Services Manager at Kelly Services. He is responsible for the strategic leadership of Kelly's engineering business throughout the Midwestern U.S. and across Canada. You will be able to ask questions during the presentation using the Q&A box that appears on the right side of your screen. Joe will answer those questions following his presentation. If time runs out before we can get to all the questions, we will make sure the answers are emailed to you. And if you have any questions about any other aspects of ME Media's webinars, please email me at jsawyer@sme.org. Now, here is Joe Lampinen.
Thank you, Jim, and thanks everyone for joining our webinar today to take a look at issues in engineering talent acquisition. It's probably a little facetious for us to title us FMEA. We're not going to engage in a full-blown failure mode and effects analysis, but we will be looking at some root causes and some preventative and corrective actions that hiring managers, human resources groups, recruiters, as well as job candidates, job seekers can take. The scope of the discussion is really looking more at the tactics and mechanics of talent acquisition as opposed to issues in supply and demand and that sort of approach. So we'll get right into it with a look at today's agenda. We're going to do a little introduction. We'll go through the talent acquisition system, and we'll look at the components in that system and the subcomponents. We'll talk about some of the major themes in talent acquisition as it pertains to engineering and manufacturing. We'll take a look at what some of the key issues are behind the scenes, some steps in the process, and some key critical to quality points that need to be addressed in almost any talent acquisition situation. We'll also look a little bit at the candidate selection process and issues and factors that can improve a candidate's chances for success in gaining the attention of the hiring manager and successfully completing a job interview and getting an employment offer. We'll close with a review of some of the main topics and then have some open time for questions and discussions. So as Jim said, I'm with Kelly. I'm with the Engineering Services Group with Kelly, and we're a Fortune 500 workforce solutions group. We're headquartered in suburban Detroit and Troy, Michigan. We've been serving the engineering profession since 1965, and we're one of the largest providers of engineering staffing in North America, with in addition to our global operations. Our services include contract staffing, contingent search, project services and project management, outsourcing, and recruiting management or recruitment process outsourcing. We're a national sponsor and supporter of SME, in addition to supporting Manufacturing Day, Engineers Week, the National Academy Foundation, and many other initiatives that support engineering and manufacturing. So we've been in the space, and we do a lot of work supporting manufacturing and manufacturing engineers. So here's a high-level look at the talent acquisition system, and obviously we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the subsystems and the components in these key parts. A systems engineer would say that a lot of the difficulties in a system come at the interface of subsystems, and I think it's as true in talent acquisition as it is in any other sort of system. The key thing being that in this particular process, we're largely talking about a communications issue, our communications breakdown. We'll get into what some of these key factors are and how individuals involved in this process can address them. So some themes that we'll be talking about, we'll come back to throughout the course of the discussion this afternoon. First of all, highlighting the importance of the job description, the specification. What type of job needs to be done? What type of credentials and experience and skill sets are necessary in order to perform the work that needs to be done? We'll go back to the idea that recruiting is really about communications and visibility on the part of the employer, on the part of the candidate or job seeker, and on the part of the recruiter. And we'll talk about how to improve that process. We'll talk about recruiting as an iterative process, hopefully with as few iterations as possible, but the fact is that there's a PDCA feedback loop in place, and we'll talk about the importance of that loop and the fact that if the first pass job candidates aren't a close match or a precise match to the needs of that particular situation, that we get some feedback on where there's a need that hasn't been addressed with the particular candidates that are under consideration. And then we will talk a little bit about supply and demand factors as they really heavily influence the tactics that recruiters and human resources offices use in order to identify job candidates. So let's first talk about the hiring manager as a component in the talent acquisition system. The hiring manager obviously heavily engaged in the process. They're the functional manager, he or she the functional manager with the talent need. The hiring manager knows what work needs to be done, why it needs to be done, how urgent the need is to have it done. They also know how long the need will exist typically in terms of is this going to be a permanent or an ongoing indefinite need, or is this going to be limited to, say, a 3-month project, 6-month project, et cetera. They have an idea, or they know precisely what their budget is to perform the work, how much money they can afford to have the work done, and they have a very good idea of the technical qualifications and credentials that are necessary to execute the work. Generally speaking, their needs involve communicating their requirements to the human resources and recruiting group, defining what it is they need in terms of talent, skill sets, credentials, and so forth. They need to provide the timely feedback regarding candidate resumes as well as following candidate interviews. They need to make time available for candidate interviews, and this can present a difficulty for hiring managers in different settings or in different organizations. But it's clear that once a candidate or candidates are identified, that time has to be set aside and has to be made a priority in order to speak with the candidates. The hiring manager also needs to work with human resources and recruiting when it gets to making a hiring decision and assembling an employment offer. But even before that, they're intimately involved in working with HR and human resources group in terms of defining their requirements so that a formal job description can be prepared. And then finally, the hiring manager, engineering manager, needs to maintain awareness of the employment environment, what trends and issues are going on in that space that affect their ability to attract the right talent and impact their ability to find the candidates that they need to get their work done. On the other end of the system is the job candidate. So this is the individual who's got the required skills, the right background, and interest in the work. Well, they certainly know their own personal qualifications in terms of credentials and experience. Sometimes if the job description is unclear or there's a little vague definition, it's up to the candidate to try and guess and interpret whether their credentials are a fit or not. And so, this may cause an individual who doesn't yet quite have the right qualification to apply in hope of passing that screen and getting to speak with the hiring manager. They also know what kind of work is of interest to them, the work environment that appeals to them, the level of compensation that is desired, as well as what they absolutely need in order to make ends meet. And they know their long-term career plans and how this particular job fits into those career plans. What a job candidate needs to do is network effectively to identify opportunities, identify referral sources, and be professionally visible. That's an area where organizations such as SME are highly important as a way of keeping the ear to the ground to find opportunities, to network with people who are in positions to introduce them to opportunities, and just maintain that professional visibility. Membership in professional organizations and societies like SME and others are very critical. They need to communicate their interest and qualifications either in response to a job posting they see or an inquiry from a recruiter, or proactively in the absence of a job opportunity to introduce themselves to a hiring manager or an engineering decision maker at an organization that they'd like to go to work for. Really, their goal is to make that short list, get an opportunity for an interview with the hiring manager where they can set themselves apart from the other short list, other candidates on the short list, and make the case that they're the candidate for the position. So obtaining the job offer, negotiating terms, obviously, is something that they'll need to do. And then lastly, we always talk with job candidates, and I think a lot of people do, about keeping options open and remaining flexible in terms of job location, industry, work shift that they might or might not be interested in working, manage their flexibility in terms of rate of pay or structure of pay, whether it's hourly pay versus salary versus length or amount of overtime that might be available in a given position. But all these things improve a candidate's chances for finding a job opportunity that suits them also. Then we'll get to the HR and recruiting function as a component of the talent acquisition system. And for purposes of our discussion this afternoon, we'll talk about these as a combined entity. In reality, there are subsystems. You may have a human resources generalist. You may have an internal recruiting or staffing organization. You may have an external recruiter or a talent or staffing agency. You may have some third-party consolidator, managed service provider, or vendor management system that consolidates the recruiting efforts of a number of different recruiters. But for purposes of today's talk, we're just going to talk about this all as the HR organization or recruiting organization. So these are the employment professionals who have the responsibility to attract the talent that's needed by the hiring manager. So in the HR organization, they need to know the employment regulations, local, state, and federal, Department of Labor, EEOC, and so on. They need to have a handle on personnel budgets, either what's affordable for a given position, what the target compensation is, whether it's wage versus salary, and so forth. A human resources organization should know their strategic plan, both their headcount forecast and their talent acquisition forecast, where they find their talent acquisition workload. How many people do they expect to need to recruit in a number of different employment categories or job titles? Well, they know the recruitment process, planning and management, and all of the pieces of that process, and they need to know the interview and selection practices. They need to manage compliance, manage personnel budgets, execute that recruiting plan, network effectively with candidates, manage the applicant tracking system, the pre-screening process, the referencing process, all of those qualifiers. And they need to work with the hiring manager to assist in making and reaching an offer decision, negotiating with the candidate, and early on in the process, assist in developing the job description and the qualifications itself. So we'll get into talking about some of the issues that go on in the process. First, let's talk about time metrics. Typical metrics in recruiting and staffing center on time to submittal, time to start, time to fill, and so forth. And in time to submittal and time to start, time to submittal is the time from the time a job is opened or posted till the time first candidate resumes are submitted to that hiring manager for decision. Time to start is the entire elapsed time from the time that job posting is officially open until someone starts on the job. Well, there are two primary sources of waiting in this cycle. There's the sourcing and the qualifying of candidates itself that's more upfront. And then there's the decision-making by the hiring manager, and really two key decisions. One, is there interest in making an interview or having an interview with the candidate? And secondly, once the interview process and all of the candidates under consideration have been reached, is there interest in pursuing the candidate to make a hiring offer, an employment offer? So getting into some of the root causes, waiting due to sourcing and qualifying generally function of how tight or how loose the definition of an acceptable candidate is. In other words, the narrower the definition, the more tight the definition, generally the fewer the number of candidates that might fit, and so therefore it could take longer or add to that time. On the contrary, or on the other end, the looser the definition, the wider the candidate pool, and the shorter the time that it might take to identify some candidates. Now, this is also a function of the supply and demand of candidates, and the supply is just basically the number of candidates out in the workforce who are available for a given position, whereas demand is a number of competing employers who want somebody with the same skills. Might not be the same job title, might not be the same industry, might not be the same function, but they're competing for the same skills because they have similar tasks that need to be done, or they need a similar expertise. Waiting is also a function of the effectiveness of the recruiting plan and tactics. Different job qualifications or job titles and classifications require different recruiting plans and tactics. And so a recruiter who's recruiting a manufacturing engineer or a process engineer is going to employ different recruiting tactics and sourcing tactics than someone who's recruiting for, say, a staff accountant or maybe an industrial mechanic or industrial maintenance tech and so forth. So it's important for the recruiters and the HR organization to use the tactics that will yield right candidates to approach regarding an opportunity. And really it boils down to the experience and the skill of the technical recruiters who are engaged in that particular staffing project. And on the other hand, waiting due to decision-making by engineering managers or the hiring managers due to a lot of different factors, obviously busy individuals, prioritization versus other work demands is a key one, reevaluation of needs. These needs can be very liquid and fluid, and so an urgent need this week becomes a back burner need next week as business needs change, and it just basically is the nature of the change in the modern workplace. Could be a delay in the internal approvals process. Sometimes in order to get an early start on recruiting and hiring, a job order will go to a recruiter before the final approval process has even been made, or before we even know whether this is going to be a full-time staff hire, whether it's going to be a contract position, a contingent opportunity, things like this. And there's also time involved in working with the particular team that hiring manager is on and developing consensus about candidates. Many times hiring decisions are team decisions, and in that scenario, getting everyone's head together and agreeing on candidate can take some time. Other issues such as travel to other plants, other work responsibilities, number of other issues can step in and cause some delay in the process. So besides resulting in some additional work, cost, and general dissatisfaction throughout everybody involved in this system, waiting also results in the loss of good candidates to other employers. So generally speaking, candidates go to people who act the quickest. It's just the nature of the modern workforce and hiring environment. Good candidates, active job seekers in particular, are eager to find work with an employer that's of interest to them. And it's not unusual for a talented candidate to receive competing job offers and have a number of people interested in their services. A couple of other issues I want to talk about, and really these get down to the fundamentals. Submittal, proposal of unqualified candidates who don't meet the minimum job specifications. Some root causes on this. One of the fundamental causes are inaccurate job specifications. A recruiter might be doing a great job of recruiting candidates, but they're recruiting candidates for an inaccurate job description. This happens from time to time, and obviously creates a lot of dissatisfaction throughout the system, both with the candidates, the recruiters, and the hiring managers. Recruiters can misunderstand the job specification. The hiring manager could send over, or the HR group could send over an absolute, exact, perfect description of the candidate that's needed, and the recruiter who gets it, if they aren't experienced in recruiting for a given type of engineer or a given industry, they might misunderstand some of the terms on the job description. They might not understand the context, things like this. And so this could result in submittal of candidates who don't appear to be a match for a given position. And then the last bullet point is just plain low-quality recruiting practices, passing through of candidates. The recruiter could have an ideal specification, they could understand the specification, and they could just have a leaky sieve of a screening process where they pass through any candidate that raises their hand and says, hey, consider me for this. And of course this adds to time on the part of that hiring manager, that engineering manager who's receiving some of these additional unqualified candidates. So another defect is selection and hire of unqualified candidates, and this is probably the worst of all, because here you've gone through the process, everyone's gone through the process of making the hiring decision, getting the individual onboarded, getting them started, then they find out that they don't have the skills and the capabilities to do the job, and it results in unsatisfactory work performance and ultimately requires replacement. So both of these things result in added cost to the system, added time, and general dissatisfaction. One of the key things you hear from some hiring managers is we're just not seeing enough job candidates. And we'll talk about some of these reasons. The job description that is too vague, incomplete, unattractive. The issue here is that a job candidate, an active job candidate who's looking at job postings, if they see a posting that just doesn't give them enough information to make them interested in the position, or that they just don't know whether it might be a fit for their skills and abilities, or whether it'd be interesting work, it's just incomplete, or it's unattractive. It just doesn't paint the picture of the work that they'd like to do. Well, this can result in a lower volume of candidates. A salary range, the combination of salary or compensation and desired qualifications, this is frequently an issue. It's not so much either item in isolation, and we'll talk about how these are combined in a couple of slides down the road here. But basically, the combination of skills that you're looking for and the salary you're willing to pay, or the compensation your company's willing to pay, this can be an issue. And on the candidate side, of course, the extent of your flexibility in accepting a job depends on other competing offers that you're having and what you can afford to work for and so forth. So on both ends, that requires a little flexibility. Work location sometimes is a problem. If you're a manufacturer and you have a plant in a small town that is isolated and it's not near major population centers or other similar employers, that can be difficult just geographically to get people to work there. You might have a sufficient volume, say, of production workers or line workers and so forth, but when it comes to a particular skilled engineering, manufacturing engineer, or instrumentation and controls engineer or something like this, you just might not have somebody in the market just because the market size is not that big, and that can be an issue. One of the touchy ones is company image and reputation, and companies do develop reputations. If you're working at a company and your company's developed a market reputation as being a company that lays people off every time the wind changes direction, or you have an engineering leader who has a reputation of just being impossible to work for, or somebody who's not a technological leader in the industry or things like this. I mean, this can present some difficulties, not so much because the pay isn't okay and the work location isn't fine. It's just unattractive from those other standpoints. The supply and demand situation really gets to market competition, and this is a matter of who else is looking to employ people with those skills. Here again, like I said, not necessarily the exact same job title, but perform the same type of work, same type of task, require the same type of talents. And then the last point there is just plain ineffective recruiting tactics, using the wrong approach to find the type of talent that you're looking for, looking in the wrong place, using the wrong recruiting message, using the wrong criteria to screen for candidates, and so forth. And these are all, well, for the most part, these are things that some corrective actions can be engaged in. Obviously, recruiting tactics being one that can be probably most readily revised. Supply-demand is something that we're in the same market. Every manufacturer is looking for the same type of talent in a given piece of geography is competing. The question is how to make your opportunity more compelling and more attractive to a given engineer. So some other sources or some other issues, and it's options on acquiring talent, and this is a consideration when you're first putting together a job description or a need for talent. Well, obviously full-time staff or having your existing full-time staff work overtime or additional hours or adding part-timers. I mean, these are things that probably are the first thing that somebody might think of. Internal reassignment and transfer, can this work be done in a different plant, a different department? Can someone be loaned to a department, things like this? Staff augmentation with contractors, temporary employees, independent contractors, consultants. These are possibilities for certain categories of work in different plants. Some employers will break out whole categories and say, okay, for this type of work, for supplementing, say, industrial maintenance technicians, we will maintain this level of staff, and then when we need to add staff for project work or for certain tasks that are going on, we'll add contractors and so forth. But that's really highly individualized, employer by employer. The next level is just to outsource the work, and it's not as simple as it sounds, but basically it's carving out an entire function and saying, okay, we're going to have somebody else do this for us. This is the make versus buy decision. Now, you can outsource by bringing the outsourcer into your plant, which some people refer to as insourcing. You can outsource to an engineering services company in the same market, in the same country, somewhere else in the U.S., maybe somewhere else in the same continent. If you're in the U.S. and you outsource to Mexico or you outsource to Canada, or overseas. Or, and this is something that a lot of job candidates sometimes get confronted with, is the decisions made to leave a position vacant and carry on and try to absorb the work, or just work out, eliminate the work entirely and find a way to take that, particularly if that particular function or work can be absorbed and that position doesn't add to the value stream at that employer. But this is an option that when some people look at it and say, well, that position's turned over, we're going to backfill the role. Well, many times manufacturers will use that as an opportunity to study the need for that position and justify the existence of the position and use it as an opportunity to save a position in terms of headcount expense. Now, this next slide, we're going to look at the triple constraint model, and probably many people on the phone, maybe all of us, are familiar with triple constraint model in terms of project management or other activity, but it's just as applicable in talent acquisition. And the old saw is, here are the three constraints on the process, pick any two out of the three. So, for example, if your priorities are you have a low budget, you can afford a low cost or a low salary or hourly rate for a given position, but it's really urgent that you get the position filled immediately, odds are you're going to have to offer the position to someone with lighter qualifications because the combination of cost and urgency being the constraint, you're going to have some flexibility on the qualifications or the quality side of it. On the other hand, if you really need somebody with impeccable qualifications, high-quality candidate, and it's very urgent you get the position filled, you may have to yield on the cost. You may have to pay a higher rate, a rate premium in order to get that person. And then lastly, if here again you demand high quality, but you can only afford a light salary or a lower hourly rate, well then it's going to take longer time to attract somebody and identify somebody with the right skills who will come to work at a lower rate. It's what we call the critical to quality loop, and this really as a way of looking at the PDCA chain when it comes to staff augmentation. Each one of these boxes defines a critical point in the process. The light blue boxes are areas where the hiring manager or the engineering manager is directly involved, needs to make a decision point or a contribution to the process. The green boxes are areas where the recruiter or the HR function is involved in performing some task or work that contributes to it. So it all starts at the top, defining the requirements, goes over to that technical recruiter who has to understand the requirements and use that to conceive and design a sourcing strategy and tactic and then execute that strategy or that tactic. They go through the pre-qualification process with the candidates who are identified through the sourcing. They'll put together the candidate package and propose or submit that candidate over to the hiring manager, who then conducts the preliminary review on paper based on the resume and the other information the recruiter, the HR team has put together. And they make a decision, do they want to interview that person based on the qualifications they see on paper? Ultimately, they need to give feedback back to that recruiter, both once the paper's been delivered, or I should say the candidate package, and then if they do go ahead and interview the candidate, once the candidate interview has been completed, they need to give feedback. Basically, yes, we want to move forward. No, this isn't a quite good enough match for my need, and so forth. But this is an excellent loop to keep in mind because this really breaks down the cycle and how the pieces fit together. Okay. To get to the hiring manager definition of requirements, this is the first and most important step, really. I mean, this is the fundamental because this drives everything else. This is comparable to URS or user requirement specification in an engineering design project. I mean, this is what forms the foundation of that sourcing and recruiting plan. You know, one of the issues is sometimes these job descriptions come out and they're obsolete. You go into the file, the last time we filled a position with this job title, here's the JD job description that we use, so let's just dust it off, let's change a few details and send it over to the recruiting staff or to the recruiting agency or what have you. Sometimes they're largely boilerplate and legalese. It's not saying that legalese and the boilerplate language isn't important because it has to be there from a legal standpoint. It's important from an employment law standpoint. But, from a recruiting standpoint and from the standpoint of the technical recruiter who's out there looking for that particular engineer or that particular technical candidate, what they're looking for are the details on the skill sets, the experience, the credentials, so on and so forth. And so if you issue a job description to a recruiter or to your staffing office internally, and it primarily consists of the boilerplate language, and it doesn't get into the detail of what you really want the person to accomplish in this role, what credentials are essential to getting the work done, things like this, then we're missing the boat and probably could stand some improvement in the job description process. One of the other issues is the moving target, the fluid job description that, companies these days are very prone to say, okay, we've got two positions vacant. Let's see if we can combine the two in a single role. And we'll come up with a job title that will cover both, and we'll mash the two descriptions together and see what's really essential. And it can create a unique job description. It can create a unique title, a unique combination of skills, something that maybe other manufacturers or other, your competitors in the industry haven't assembled that way, or maybe others in town haven't assembled that way. And then you put this over to your staffing group or your recruiting office or what have you, and they'll say, okay, now go find somebody who's done this and done that. And that can be a highly customized, unique combination of skills, and it can lead to some difficulties in identifying candidates. So, the other issue is just the job description that comes out, and then before you proceed to make a hiring decision or even get to the point of selecting a candidate, the description's evolving. The process, the position is re-engineering or being re-engineered even before the candidates are identified. And so that's something to bear in mind, at any point. And recruiters are used to this. They know that they need to be fluid and flexible in terms of changing direction. But, the earliest as a hiring manager that direction's changing, it's important to share that information with the recruiters so they can alter their screening, alter their sourcing tactics, and so forth. The importance of job titles is something that a lot of people don't appreciate, but from a standpoint of communicating an opportunity, the more vague the job title, the more difficult it can be really to identify a good candidate. If your company uses a job title like, say, Engineer 3, that's a pretty generic job title. It can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, whereas a job title like Senior Mechanical Design Engineer, and with an extension of your particular industry, a little bit more descriptive and helps attract the attention of somebody who's got the right skills, right industry experience, and things like that. And then lastly, just a point on job postings. There are a lot of cliche terms and basically space fillers in job postings. A couple of the most common cliches, just to use the phrase, hey, we've got a great opportunity in a fast-paced work environment. Well, I challenge anybody on the phone to identify a company that doesn't have a fast-paced work environment these days. There aren't a lot of companies that don't have fast-paced work environments. And so those types of things are more or less space fillers, and the more descriptive that you can get, if you're responsible for putting together a job posting, if you're a recruiter or you're a hiring manager or you're a HR manager, probably the more effective your job posting will be in attracting the interest of a candidate. Oh, in the recruiting business, we talk about active and passive candidates. And an active candidate, we'll look at the candidate pool as a bell curve. If you look at it as a bell curve, active candidates represent a minority of candidates on the left side of the bell curve, about 20% or so, depending on the exact job title or qualification. These are the individuals who are actively looking for work. They're actively looking at job postings. They're actively networking. They're posting their resumes on resume boards. They're self-nominating, applying to opportunities, and so forth. The strength or the reason that recruiters would go look for active candidates is they're doing some of the work for the recruiter. In other words, they're trying to self-identify. They're raising their hand saying, hey, consider me for that opportunity. And from a sheer participation standpoint, an active candidate is identifying themselves and saying, hey, that's a job I'm interested in. The weakness of primarily targeting active candidates is, number one, you're targeting a small fraction of qualified candidates, 20% or so, depending on the exact qualification or description. It also generates a lot of unqualified candidates, people who are out of work and people who are looking for a new job. Sometimes they can be a little over-optimistic in terms of what they're qualified for or how well they might match a given opportunity, and so human nature is that they're going to apply even if they're not quite meeting the minimum qualifications. And the third point is qualified candidates don't stay in the active job market very long, not in a lot of cases anyway. I mean, a qualified candidate is doing everything they can, if they're an active candidate, to find employment. And if it's not with you, it's going to be with someone else who's going to meet their expectations in terms of opportunity and compensation and so on. So those are a couple of the weaknesses of relying solely or exclusively on active candidates. Passive candidates, on the other hand, really represent the bulk of qualified candidates, about 60% plus, depending on the particular qualification. These individuals aren't necessarily actively looking for work, but they may be receptive to the right opportunity. And it really depends on meeting their motivation. Some people are motivated by the opportunity for financial improvement, increased compensation, advancement, maybe go from a supervisor to manager, manager to director, what have you, a better work atmosphere, challenging projects. This is very important when you're talking about technical employees and engineers. Survey after survey after survey shows that engineers are attracted to technical challenges and solving difficult engineering problems. And so the more an employer can do to highlight the technical challenge in their work and what's interesting about the work from an engineering standpoint, the better we do in attracting candidates. Corporate image, employment branding, and themes are important, but these are more inspirational messages. Inspiring candidates to make a change, inspiring candidates to think of ABC company in a positive light as far as a potential employer. Now, the weakness of targeting passive candidates is it may well take a greater investment of time and recruiting energy. It definitely takes more creativity in recruiting because you have to identify these people who are not identifying themselves necessarily. And then some manufacturers are reluctant to target a competitor's staff There might be restrictive covenant or non-compete clauses and so forth. And lastly, you've got the other end of the bell curve. The reluctant candidates are basically people who aren't candidates. They're not in the job market whatsoever, actively or otherwise. And these individuals can still be approached as a referral source because they may have networked and may know people who are in the business who might be able to do that work. Just a point of trivia, you may hear from time to time the term purple squirrel. It's probably the most overused term in recruiting. It refers to a unique combination of skills and experience, such as I was speaking about before when somebody combines two jobs into one, let's say, and it makes a needle in a haystack sort of skill requirement. Some recruiters will use the term just to refer to any candidate they can't find, and that just want to point out a term you might hear from time to time. Some recruiting sources, well, job and resume boards are the first places almost anybody goes to, whether you're looking for an active candidate in particular or not. Company sites, your own employment board if you're the employer, the general employment boards like Monster and CareerBuilder and so on, specialty boards, engineering.com, professional association societies such as SME's own employment and jobs board. College and alumni offices, a great place to network and make connections and get referrals. Direct sourcing is that effort to dial in and identify people who are currently doing work elsewhere for another company, a competitor, somebody else in the industry. You can find some excellent candidates who are willing to listen to an opportunity that way. It is time consuming, it's labor intensive. It takes a special type of person to do that. This is what skilled technical recruiters are really excellent at. But it is a way to identify some great candidates. Professional networking at both at society and association events as well as trade shows, conferences, and so forth. This is a great go-to to identify some good people, get some good referrals. Employee referral programs. Many employers will have formal employee referral programs that will result in some tangible reward for referring a highly qualified candidate who ends up getting employed. And this can be an excellent way. And then lastly, conversion of contractors. Some companies do this from time to time. Other companies do it routinely, but this is an excellent way to take a longer look at a contractor. It's like gives the hiring manager and that employee or that worker both an opportunity to check each other out, as far as quality of work and the work environment and the management style and so forth. Employer branding, it's important really for both active and passive candidates, but and it answers questions like what kind of place is ABC Corporation, what's it like to work there. It's really a matter of establishing and communicating your company culture through word of mouth, through image messaging, image advertising, and repeating that theme in your recruitment messaging. You want to be a front-of-mind employer of choice in anyone who might be looking for work or anybody who learns of an opportunity there. Now, in the candidate selection, things start many times with the resume or the CV. This is really the advertisement. If you're the candidate, this is your advertisement. The purpose is to provide that hiring manager with enough information to decide whether they want to speak to you and offer you an interview. Contents generally consist of your credentials, your employment history, and most importantly, your accomplishments. If you just list your credentials and your employment history, that would be like Coca-Cola having an ad that says, hey, we're Coke, we're a soft drink, and leaving it at that. You really want to talk about your accomplishments, why they should be interested in you based on what you've accomplished, in addition to the particular roles that you've held during your career. They should be concise, generally 2 pages or less, in other words, front and back of a single page, or that amount of electronic content. You should include keywords that are relevant to your particular area of technology. And I would include, basically we're talking about appealing to applicant tracking systems. And different applicant tracking systems use different algorithms, but you don't want to be in a situation where you list on your resume you have a BSME and you haven't spelled out Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering, and so the machine passes you over, and that can happen with some systems. It depends on how they're how the algorithm is structured, obviously. My suggestion would be to repeat both the abbreviation and spell out the thing, just to, that's the belt and suspenders approach, basically. Question about editing really is a matter for HR and the recruiter. I mean, the hiring manager, if you're the hiring manager, you probably want to know, is this the resume as it was submitted by the candidate, or has it been altered or edited or so forth? When I interview people for hire, I like to see the actual resume as it's prepared by the candidate, and see how the candidate expresses themselves in writing and so forth. And you'll want to compare the resume to the individual's profile on LinkedIn and other online profiles, and most employers do nowadays. We'll talk about the interview process, and you can really have a webinar all about interviewing. I mean, this is a subject in itself. Basically, the interview is the opportunity as a hiring manager for you to see if that candidate on paper or that candidate in person looks as good as the candidate on paper did. In other words, it allows you to bring that candidate to life. The goal is to compare the resume to the actual person, and from the hiring manager standpoint, can you envision that person working for you on the job, getting the work done, and convincing you that they'll be effective in the role? You should allow time, obviously, for an unrushed interview and refresh yourself on the resume prior to the interview. Interviews are stressful for everyone involved, so it's important to put the candidate at ease. Nobody needs to be intentionally stressed here. And basically, police interrogators, military interrogators, they will put subjects at ease in some cases, because when someone's relaxed, maybe they'll be more forthcoming, more frank with their responses. They're not as guarded. And that can be important in helping to really understand what makes a candidate tick, what they're interested in, what they're good at, and all that sort of thing. Use the follow-up questioning. Follow lines of questioning, at least 3 questions deep. It's similar to the 5 whys practice. And use open-ended questions. A hiring manager interview with a candidate, generally the candidate should speak at least twice as long as the hiring manager. If you're the hiring manager, don't fall into a trap where you're doing most of the talking. Obviously, in candidate selection, the goal is to select the best available candidate. And the real crux of it is, what's your confidence level that this particular candidate would be successful in the role? You should expect counteroffers and competing offers if you're dealing with a really skilled candidate. You'll want to work with other interviews to reach that go, no-go decision as soon as possible, particularly if it's a team hire decision. Go meaning further consideration, no-go meaning not interested. Whatever you do, don't review candidates without providing some feedback, whether it's an interview or resume consideration. Let that HR department, so they can let the candidate know what their status is. That feedback to HR and recruiters is essential just to keep the process on track. Now, just to wrap up before we get to questions, so recognizing defects, here are some examples of symptoms in the process: insufficient volume of resumes, poor quality of candidates, excessive volume. Why would excessive volume be an issue? Well, part of a human resources or recruiter's job is to screen out the candidates that aren't a fit. And so if you're being buried by resumes, many of which, unfortunately won't be a match for what you need, this can be an issue. False start candidates, meaning those who back out once they receive an offer, or they get along in the process and they accept a counter or a competing offer. If you have recruiters who are pushing their candidates, selling candidates to you as opposed to consulting and providing feedback and offering to put together candidate profiles based on your needs, that can be an issue for you. Prolonged time to submit or time to start, like we talked about. And ultimately, poor on-the-job success of selected candidates is indicative of how well your talent acquisition process is going. It all starts with a good description, solid description, the work that needs to be done, the skills and the credentials that are essential. Communicating, can't emphasize enough, it's highly important you communicate with your HR group or whoever's doing the recruiting. And that responsiveness to submittals and interviews is important to reduce overall cycle time and make sure you get the best available candidate available for you. And so that feedback to the recruiter is an important part of that process. And it should also suggest using the minimum number of recruiters needed to produce good results. Crowdsourcing isn't necessarily always a good idea. Here again, you can be overwhelmed with a volume of candidates that's unmanageable and time-consuming. And secondly, crowdsourcing or use of multiple recruiters is really best value when you're talking about high-volume recruiting of highly difficult-to-source candidates. So, that's definitely a good application for that process. All right, now we've reached the question and answer part of the program.
Hi, Joe. This is Jim Sawyer joining you. Yes, we do have some questions here, and let me go through and throw some of these out to you.
Sure.
In deciding to hire a given candidate or waiting until a better one comes along, how valuable is it to know the size of the talent pool that the candidate has come from? I guess this is basically asking, is it better to pick a candidate from a small pool because you're not likely to have too many more choices, or with a big pool wait and see if you might not be able to get something better than what you see at the current time?
Yeah, well, this is where it's important for that hiring manager to have situational awareness, awareness of the employment market in their particular area of technology in their discipline. If the talent pool is small, if you're in a small town or a small market and you don't have a large number of people with a particular skill set or qualification to choose from, you need to make a decision. Do the available candidates have the skills sufficient to get the job done? If they don't, are they trainable? Do they have the raw talent where they have part of the required skills and you're going to have to finish them off with some on-the-job training? Or does the search need to be expanded? Do you need to look for people with the right skills maybe elsewhere in the region, elsewhere in the state, maybe coast to coast for some jobs? So that's really a judgment call. It is important to bear in mind how rare or how difficult to source a particular type of candidate is given the circumstances. Really everything we talked about in that one slide, talking about geography, size of the market, compensation package, and so on.
So not all purple squirrels are the same degree of purple, I guess, would be an answer.
Very true.
I would like to let our attendees know that while we are nearing the top of the hour, that is not a hard stop for us. We can go beyond the 3 o'clock mark if you're in the Eastern time zone. And so we'll keep going with the questions here. And if you do have to leave, you can sign in after 7 p.m. today and listen to the replay on-demand version of this and catch up on what you might have missed. Okay, another question. As a hiring manager, is there a difference in approach, communication, job description, etc., when soliciting internal hiring resources versus external recruits?
This is, if you're talking about internal, say someone who's going to be transferring over as a lateral transfer or maybe a promotional opportunity, someone who's posted internally, that's really highly subject to the size, structure of your organization, the nature of your industry in terms of, is it feasible for someone to move from one department to another, as well as your company practices, your policies and procedures. Going to external recruiters or recruiting external candidates obviously opens up the volume of potential candidates, can inject some fresh blood. Some organizations will post a job internally and shortly thereafter or simultaneously sometimes look to the outside for someone who's got the right skills. If an internal assessment's been done and candidates who self-nominated haven't been selected because they don't have the right particular skill, well, then you have no alternative but to look outside. Retention and career development is an important issue for any employer nowadays, and many companies, wherever possible, will promote from within or provide an opportunity for someone to advance their career in an organization. However, sometimes people with the right skills just aren't available, or you intentionally want someone to come in from another industry or who's had other experience just to inject a different perspective. So it really depends on the situation, but there are advantages to both.
All right. How important is networking in learning about job openings?
Well, networking is the name of the game. I mean, it's all communication, and networking is a key way to network your interest if you're a job candidate, and to network the opportunity if you're the hiring manager, or in some cases pass the word that, hey, next week we're going to have a job posting out. Do you know anybody who might be a fit? I mean, there are a lot of informal back channel communications and networking goes on unofficially, just to get a pulse on the candidate market. Who might be available? Does anybody know of anybody? Things like this. And so networking really is the name of the game, and professional and technical recruiters rely on networking as well as hiring managers and candidates themselves. But as a candidate, you're all about being visible, and as a hiring manager, you're all about looking for people who've made themselves visible or getting referral to someone who may be interested in an opportunity.
Okay. Well, here's someone who's certainly open to opportunity. Since I am starting my career, I am open to all salary requirements, they write, probably offers. I'll interpret that as meaning. But usually recruiters ask for a base salary. If I give my expected salary and it's higher than what they were offering, will they typically decline a candidate without even finding out if that candidate is willing to negotiate?
This is a very tough question, and it's tough whether you're starting out in your career or whether you're well along in your career, looking to make a change in your job. Some recruiters, some organizations will counter. If you say as a entry-level engineer, let's say, you need to get an offer of at least $25 an hour or at least $30 an hour, given your particular credentials or the industry that you're looking to enter, and they say, well, thank you, good to know, this particular opportunity offers $24 an hour or $28 an hour. Basically, a lot of recruiters will engage in a give and take like that. Doesn't necessarily rule you out of consideration unless there's a wide difference in what you'd consider and what that particular employer would offer. If you're in doubt as to the market value or street value of a given position, there are a lot of resources available online, a lot of references that you can go to in terms of salary surveys and reference material where you can see that someone with, say, a master's in mechanical engineering in this industry, in this region, averages this range. The 25th percentile is here, 75th percentile is there, and so on. And that can give you some ballpark idea. And obviously, as an entry level, as a graduate engineer just coming out, you can use that to gauge where you might want to position yourself.
All right. Here's someone who's a little earlier in their engineering life. What should someone just starting their third year of engineering school be doing now to best set themselves up to be hired upon graduation?
Well, if you're still an undergraduate and you're in engineering school, you'd want to find some interesting places where you can intern, where you can engage in work over the summer. If there's a particular industry that appeals to you, look for those opportunities. But getting that practical experience is going to be very helpful to you to see how engineering really works in practice in a manufacturing environment. Because, obviously not all manufacturing sectors are identical or similar. There's wide variation in different manufacturing settings. Plus, consider manufacturing as fabrication, assembly, process industries. And, you can see a very wide range of technologies, of leadership styles. And these types of things are important to you when you complete your education. You're going out to the job market. Secondly, obviously, doing very well in your studies, maintaining good grades. Some of the things that employers look for, or they tell us they look for as a talent and a recruitment agency, are the ability to have that business awareness. And so, somebody said one of the most powerful combinations in business is an engineering undergraduate combined with a business graduate degree. You don't necessarily need to get an MBA in order to be valuable to an employer, though. If you've got some exposure to project management, if you've got experience working as a member of a team, if you've taken a business or a finance minor or some other type of preparation that that gives you some big picture awareness, I think that's going to be helpful to you. But all those things that give you more exposure, that get you used to working as a member of a team and delivering results as a member of a team, I think are going to be helpful for you.
Okay. We have two questions here from recent graduates that are similar. Let me read them both, Joe, and then maybe you can synthesize an answer for these two individuals. What advice do you have for recent graduates who are just starting out in their field and trying to build their work experience beyond internship with companies? And the other is, I am in the job market for almost 2 months now. I have not received any interview calls yet. I have a master's degree in mechanical engineering with a GPA of 3.9 and 1.5 years of research experience. What should I be doing? It's sort of the classic question upon graduation. How do I put my foot in the stirrup so I can get up in the saddle?
Yeah, well, many times, obviously internships are helpful, but many times a graduate engineer coming out will find their first opportunity would be as an advanced technician. And you basically prove yourself by chipping away. You may start on a contractor level to prove yourself to an employer before converting over and working full-time. You may take a technician or maybe a drafter designer role and prove yourself there before advancing on to an engineer role. You may work as a technologist, an entry-level technology specialist in order to get your foot in the door. There are a lot of ways that you can prove yourself to a particular employer, kind of pay your dues, if you will, and then you'll have some actual industrial work experience under your belt when the time comes and opportunities available, either internally or at someone else, either in the same industry or using related technology. And in regards to the individual who's got the master's degree and the high GPA and so forth, it's a little difficult to comment on any individual example or any individual case without seeing your background and so forth. There are a lot of different reasons, unfortunately, that people have difficulty getting employment opportunity. I don't know what particular industries you've been looking at and what your master's has prepared you for and so forth. Best advice I can say, and I had it in one of the slides, is to keep up your flexibility in terms of options that you might consider. If you've been applying mainly in one industry or another, or for a particular job title or another, you might open up your possibilities a little bit by looking at some other options. The other thing we tell and I would suggest anyone looking for work, is in addition to your credentials and your hard qualifications, look at your skill sets and find ways to apply the skills that you have, even though they might not be a precise match for your degree, your sheepskin. I mean, there are an awful lot of things. If you come out with a master's in mechanical engineering, you're prepared to do a lot of things. You have a lot of skills under your belt that you can apply, and so it's a matter of doing that skills inventory and seeing where you can make an initial match. Here again, the objective being get your foot in the door, gain some industrial experience before looking for that position that you really want to drive towards.
Well, very good. Thank you, Joe. If any of you would like to contact Joe directly or visit the Kelly Services website, the contact information is listed on the screen right now. So if you'd like to, please copy that down, and we'll give you a second or two more here if you wish to do that. Joe will share more of his knowledge as part of a panel discussing workforce development on November 20th at the FabTech show in Chicago. FabTech is just one of the shows SME takes part in, where you can learn about new technologies and network with industry professionals. Other upcoming events are WestTech in the middle of this month in Los Angeles and SouthTech at the end of October in Greenville, South Carolina. In addition, SME's Training and Development Division offers certification, training, books and videos, and further learning and development solutions to the manufacturing community workforce. Manufacturing Engineering Media also offers ways to stay up to date with workforce issues. Every issue of Manufacturing Engineering magazine includes a Focus on the Workforce feature, and every Manufacturing Engineering yearbook includes a section on workforce development. Thanks for taking part today. We hope you found the webinar of great benefit.